Welcome back, everyone, to Morning Line on this Monday. Nick Beres here, talking about a topic I know on many of your minds. The phone lines, guys, are loaded up, and we've got two great guests this morning talking about the issue of the Confederate flag and the reaction and what the future is. With us this morning is Gene Andrews, Sons of Confederate Veterans. Nice to have you on, sir.
Thank you, sir.
And we also have Matthew Walker with us, one of the original freedom riders, a civil rights advocate. Before we went to break, you wanted to make a quick point about what he said, sir.
Yes, I did want to react to one point in particular that Mr. Andrews made, and he used the term war criminals insofar as the behavior of the Northern troops is concerned in some instances in the South. When you say war criminals, the first thing that comes to my mind is General Nathan Bedford Forrest. What greater war criminal could there have been in the Civil War than General Forrest? Among other things, General Forrest killed black troops at Fort Pillow. He tied certain black soldiers to a log and lit the log on fire. It wasn't just a cedar log, it had to be a green cedar log, because green cedar log burned slower and increased the torture of the victim tied to that log. General Forrest is also accused of having killed women and children at Fort Pillow. In other words, there could be no greater criminal than General Forrest, and we're talking about his statue.
And that brings up again one of the other issues. We're talking about the Confederate flag, but the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest and the under the state capitol.
He's referring to Fort Pillow.
Yes.
Forrest was on a raid into West Tennessee in March and April of 1864 to get horses. They went from Columbus, Mississippi on a straight line north-south up through West Tennessee to Paducah, Kentucky, and Mayfield. Were turned around. They were coming back out of Tennessee. They had no intention of going to Fort Pillow. It was the civilians of West Tennessee that asked Forrest to do something about these war criminals in Fort Pillow. Fielding Hurst was one of the most brutal individuals in Tennessee history. They were shooting Confederate prisoners just on sight. And he had one of them, an officer, tied up. He was beaten. His private parts were cut off. They slit his mouth open from ear to ear and left him to bleed out in the field. That's why Forrest went after Fort Pillow. Okay. Yes, there were black troops there. They would not surrender. They were firing after the Confederates got into the fort. Confederates were being shot in the back. They were returning fire. The so-called eyewitness account of these claims that were made at Fort Pillow was written by a Northern war correspondent in Knoxville. That's 395 miles away from Fort Pillow.
There were
guys had a heck of a pair of eyes to see that far.
All right, let's take a phone call here. Let's go to Paul. Paul, good morning.
Oh, good morning. Lord have mercy, Nick. I am the perfect caller for this subject this morning. First of all, let me give you some background on me. There is nothing, and I don't know about the Civil War, or with one of your guests there, he calls it the war between the states. There is nothing I don't know about it. A lot of my kinfolk are members of the Son of Confederate Veterans. All right? I ain't got no problem with the Son of Confederate Veterans at all. And by the way, your other guest mentioned Nathan Bedford Forrest about Fort Pillow. That is absolutely the truth. And the Son of Confederate Veterans guy there is a misrepresentation. And I read 2 books on Nathan Bedford Forrest. 2 of them. I know exactly what Nathan Bedford Forrest was. Nathan Bedford Forrest was a racist. There's no doubt about it. I don't even want to hear about that. Getting to the Confederate flag. And one more point. The guy said that we should ban the U.S. flag because it flew over slavery for 100, 200 years. He failed to mention that for the 4 years of the Civil War, that it was fighting to free the slaves, that American flag, and the Confederate flag was fighting to keep slavery. He failed to mention that. Now, getting to the Confederate flag, it should not fly on municipal buildings and on courthouses and places like that. It should be at the Carter House, the Carton Plantation. It should be on battlefields. And if you want to fly it in your front yard, that's fine. But it should not be in municipal buildings. And getting to Forrest bust at the state legislature, Nick, that needs to come out of that.
Paul, thank you. All right, what about his point? Now, do you agree that it should not be flown over any municipal buildings, public buildings, say, for instance, the Capitol in South Carolina?
Yes, I do.
Should be down, not
yes.
There, not in a publicly sanctioned area. Public tax dollars paying for the flagpole shouldn't be there. Maybe where does the Confederate flag, in your mind, belong?
Just as the gentleman said, in private places, private property, museums, but not places supported by tax dollars. What makes the flag being in a public place supported by tax dollars is that it ignores the history of this country and the role that those values represented by the Confederate flag played in the condition of African Americans in this country today.
Okay, Mr. Andrews, does that sound reasonable to you, or do you believe it should be allowed to be where it's flying in South Carolina?
That's an erroneous assumption. As we've said before, Lincoln said the war wasn't about slavery. It was about preserving the Union. He didn't come up with the emancipation and the slavery option until 2 years into the war, and they were getting whipped, and they needed to come up with something to bring a sentiment together in the North and try to keep England and France out of the war on the side of the Confederacy. The war was fought as wars have been fought since way back when Uglag hit Mugog over the head with a dinosaur bone out in front of the cave, about money.
Okay,
The South had the money,
all right, so
because the South had cotton.
So where does that go toward your thoughts on the question I asked him about it flying over municipal buildings, public buildings?
Because it's history. It's the history of our country that was fighting to defend itself from an illegal invasion of this part of the country. The South did not invade the North. Lincoln invaded us. He sent the fleet to Fort
But as
Sumter.
history, I mean, there are a lot of different pieces of history. In terms of flying, I mean, would it not better belong in a museum? Does it have to be out there?
That's never good enough for
Okay, it's not
we
good
take
enough.
the flag down, we compromise, we give up something of value, and the opposition gives up nothing except the threat of violence. That's not compromise. We take the flag down from the Capitol Dome in South Carolina. They said, okay, we'll move it to the Confederate Monument there on the Capitol grounds. Now that's not good enough. We put the flags in the Tennessee State Museum. They had an exhibit of Confederate flags that had been restored, and the Sons of Confederate Veterans from our license plate turns in about $20,000 a year to the state of Tennessee to restore Confederate flags in the Tennessee State Museum. The state of Tennessee doesn't have the money to do that. We raise that privately. They put an exhibit in the State Museum, just as Mr. Walker has claimed that they need to be in a museum. That wasn't good enough. That offended people, that it was in the State Museum. And it wasn't even, the one that was out front wasn't even the Confederate flag. We got one here. It was the green Irish flag that was on the back of the 10th Tennessee Infantry Regiment. And somebody told them, oh, you need to be offended. That's a Confederate flag. And sure enough, they were offended, and they moved the exhibit away.
Let's go to Regis. Hi, Regis.
Yes, hi.
Go ahead, sir.
My thoughts about the Confederate flag is that it is of our past, and the flag is not the problem. The problem is the people. The flag is not the problem.
Okay. All right. So so is your opinion then what with regard to the flag?
My flag is it should be taken down, but instead of us focusing on this Confederate flag, we should not focus on this Confederate flag.
Oh, okay. All right. So he's viewing it. It's a symbol, but that he finds it being, maybe something that's representative of racism among folks.
The same argument that's thrown out every time when there's one of these horrific shootings. It's always the gun that did. For some reason, they have the idea the gun jumped up off the ground, jumped into this person's hand, and then went off by itself. It's the crazy people out there. This guy was a nutcase.
Do you believe, Mr. Walker, that the Confederate flag being out there can help foster racism among fanatics like the one who committed these crimes in South Carolina?
Absolutely. I think it only cements and underlines the culture of racism, which is still so prevalent in this country today. And when you have a person who is inclined to think like Mr. Roof, who killed those people, and for him to see something like the Confederate flag prominently displayed, well, that only encourages him in his thinking about black people. And,
okay. Yeah, reinforcing it. Is that fair? I mean, I see where some people have made that argument. I hear what he's saying. Is that not fair?
You could make that argument. You could, but I think if you want to point fingers and accusation, I would like to point the finger at the government-run school system. They do not teach the accurate history and history of the Confederate flag. Everything in schools today is about political correctness, multiculturalism, and they denigrate and trash the Confederate flag. So if you've got a guy that's not really stable anyway, what he learned in school, he's going to apply to the Confederate flag and think, oh, this is a way I can get back at blacks. He doesn't see it as history. He sees it as some way to get at blacks. And that's where that comes from, I think. And what you say, well, how do you know? You've been out of school for 100 years, almost. How do you know that? Well, I go to a lot of these living history things that they have around, and I dress up in my uniform, and Friday is always school day. They bring the kids out and dump them out of the school bus. It is absolutely appalling, the lack of historical knowledge that students have today. They have no clue.
Take a break on that note when we come back. More of our conversation and more of your phone calls right after this.
It is a part of the lesson.